Welcome to The Real Heal, a show featuring real, raw, and authentic conversations between experts in the holistic health space. I am your host, Dr. Renee Wallenstein, also known as the Libidoologist, double board certified doc, entrepreneur, as well as healthcare disruptor. So if you're ready, let's get into it. Neil, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you on.
Thank you so much, Renee. It's an honor to be on your show. Excited for our talk.
I am as well. And you got some exciting, things coming down the pike, which we'll talk about, and books that we'll talk about. But before we get into it, let's give my audience and myself a little introduction to who you are and how you got doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, thank you. It's a common question, and like you allude to, most people who work in holistic health have a backstory, and most people I've interviewed as well have reversed some kind of illness themselves, or they've helped someone else very close to them reverse some kind of illness, which has changed their trajectory. And I used to be in real estate, so it wasn't until I suffered my own, I was suffering for about 30 years from eczema, and I was always given the same symptom masking treatments by my doctor. So steroid creams, which have left pigmentation on my skin, and prescription moisturizers, which contain nasty ingredients, and antibiotics, which destroy the gut lining. I was given these kind of treatments for 30 years. And it wasn't until my dad's stroke where I had my wake-up call. So it's kind of a roundabout way. So he had a stroke, and a few years prior to his stroke, I remember him being told he had chronic inflammation, which has now become the focus of my work. And I didn't know what that was at the time. And I just remember him telling me that he had it. I remember distinctly where we were in the house. We were in the family kitchen, and he just came out with it, which is kind of unusual for him. His sister is actually, my aunt is a naturopathic doctor and has about 100 letters after her name. And she had told him this information. And when he had the stroke, I was convinced that his stroke was avoidable. I just had this kind of inner knowing, this innate intelligence telling me his stroke was avoidable. And thinking about inflammation, I'd actually written a book already about increasing testosterone naturally for guys, and I saw this word inflammation. I was seeing it in books I was reading and documentaries I was watching, and it was just everywhere, in interviews I was watching. So I went on a bit of a research quest, and soon enough, I very quickly found out it's the underlying cause of every illness. And it seemed so simple to me. And I thought, why is everyone not talking about this? It's literally the underlying cause of almost every chronic illness for which there is a drug or a treatment across the board. It's like almost every illness is a recurring revenue stream for the drug industry. So anyway, I decided that I could, excuse me for the noise to my side. I decided that I wanted to kind of focus on this, and I got rid of my eczema by changing some habits, some lifestyle habits, by changing what I was eating and managing my emotions, reducing stress. And very quickly, my own eczema went away. And then I decided to kind of put myself out there and help other people do the same thing. In fact, my very first client at the beginning of 2015 approached me. I'd never done any coaching before. And she said, "Can you help me with my health?" And we did this, and we focused on inflammation. So I looked up some blood tests, and I've always used blood tests now with my clients, and normally inflammation is elevated, and we just work over it for normally 8 weeks, 12 weeks, and we bring that down by a number of different approaches. So what I found out was similar approaches could work across the board for many different illnesses. And it doesn't just have to be skin, it could be asthma, it could be psoriasis, it can be an autoimmune condition, it can be gout, arthritis, all sorts of things. And it's all down to inflammation, this underlying cause, under which there are root causes. That's the long version.
So what does, inflammation to so many people sounds very like they understand acute inflammation, right? You have an injury, your arm, your elbow turns red, it gets swollen. What does chronic inflammation mean to you? What is that? So we can define that for the audience, so it doesn't sound like this way off term because they see it all over the place now. Like, but do we really know what it is? What is it?
Great question. You remind me of a talk I did in UCLA actually a couple of years ago. I said, who's heard of inflammation? Everyone's heard of it. I said, who can tell me what it is? Almost no one in the audience could say what it is. So in its simplest form, as you've described acute, that's the immune system repairing an injury and doing everything it can to get you back to normal balance. In the body, systemic or chronic inflammation is typically a result of something entering the body that the immune system doesn't recognize. And it goes into some kind of state of defense. It's a very healthy immune response. If we didn't have it, we'd die. So we need to be grateful for it. And it's our immune system really protecting us from foreign or alien intruders. And it can also be a result of chronic stress. So the easiest way of thinking of it, let's say from a dietary standpoint, it's the easiest, most tangible way of looking at it. If we're consuming something that isn't designed for human consumption, I always use the term in alignment with the nature codes. The moment we step out of that, we're really messing with what's going in our bodies. And that has the potential to create an inflammatory response. There's lots of things that can cause inflammation, of course, not just food. It can be the environment. We could be exposed, we could be sleeping next to a cell phone tower. We could be by a chemical plant. We could have pesticides being sprayed on our, there's all kinds of things that can trigger it. But it's in simplest form, it's the immune system protecting us, and the body will create symptoms depending on your genetic code. So for me, that's eczema. I can't say it's cured because, I mean, I'm using air quotes here for listeners and not watchers. I can't say that quote, sorry, I can't say it's cured because if my body gets toxic again for whatever reason, my eczema can come back. But for the most part, it's gone, and it's not a challenge for me. And that's how I consider any symptom. Symptoms are there indicating that there's inflammation. We're told about genetic diseases and incurable diseases. I like to think of them as symptoms, chronic symptoms of an underlying cause.
I love that. Great explanation. I think that clarifies it for the audience because, again, I think they'll shut down if they hear inflammation, if we talk about inflammation, and they don't really have a way of thinking about it. So that was perfect. And I heard in there something along the lines, and I read this when I was reading the reviews of your book, which we'll talk about in a second, but about you referring to epigenetics. And I think you just sort of referred to the genetics. Can you tell us what that is? Because I think that's another word that's coming out so much, epigenetics. Like, what is it and how it affects our health? And are we in control? Because it sounds like, oh, genetics, it's out of my control. And I hear this a lot. Like, I'm genetically predisposed to X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to get X, Y, and Z. And is that true?
No, in a nutshell, no. Our genes are not our destiny. Our genes are like a blueprint. Epigenetics is like the software. Epi means above. So you've got the genes, and then you've got epi, which is the epigenetics is the software running the hardware. That's probably the best way of looking at it. So we know that it's the environment in the body that signals the genes. It's not the genes that trigger the illness. So if we're left to thinking, my mother had this, my father had that, I'm predisposed to getting it, it kind of leaves us powerless, almost like there's nothing we can do. However, the science of epigenetics, which has been around for decades, tells us that actually we can change the environment in our body to signal genes in different ways or signal new genes in new ways. And there's many things that affect the environment. So think of epigenetics as the environment that signals our genes. So lots of things affect it. It could be what we're eating, it could be our thoughts, it can be our emotions, it can be trapped emotions and trauma. Many things affect the environment in our body. But the main thing to know and take away from this is we can influence our gene expression by the environment that we keep in our body. And that puts us back into the driving seat. By the way, this is true for more than 95% of the population. In fact, Joe Dispenza, last week, I was in Cancun, as I mentioned earlier, he talked about it being closer to like 98% of the population are in control of their gene expression. A very tiny proportion of the population is born with a so-called defective gene, in which case we don't have much power to influence that expression. But for the vast majority of the population, it puts us back into the driving seat, knowing about the science of epigenetics. We get to control the environment in our bodies, therefore we get to control our gene expression.
I love that. And you referenced, and I just want to highlight this, it's not only, I think people think it's what we eat and the environment we put ourselves in, but it's also our thoughts, our mindset, like how we think and how we act, and how we take in the world around us has an impact on how we express our genetics as well. So I don't think people
Mm.
think about that, but it's a lot of things.
That
So
lot.
thank you.
Sorry, I was going to say that last piece you mentioned, I think, is the absolute most important piece. It's our perception of our world.
Mhm. But
And
I
if we're,
don't
yeah,
go ahead.
if we react, for example, in traffic jams, that's going to change our genes.
Mhm.
We're going to be living by the hormones of stress.
Mhm.
And the more reactive we are, the less calm we are. And we know that down regulates genes or up regulates genes for disease, for example. So I think that's the right terminology. Yeah. So basically we don't want to be living by the hormones of stress, because that is not good for the immune system or the body in general.
It's so
So yeah.
important. So important. And I just want to throw that in there because I think oftentimes we all forget about our thoughts and our feelings and our response to external stressors and our reactions and what happens after all the thoughts that go through our head, even after the
Mm.
event is over. So definitely has an impact
Yes.
on your genetics. So you wrote a book. Your most current book is The Vitality Secret: Defies Disease, Combat Chronic or Common Illnesses, and Stay Young. And I know you have another one coming out, which we'll talk about in a second. But can you tell us a little bit about that book and pretty much, who's it for and was it cover? And
Yes. So the Vitality Secret, that was the 2016 version, and the main focus of that is revealing and discussing what inflammation is and how to deal with it, predominantly from a dietary perspective, and exercise, and managing stress, and other techniques like grounding, which is scientifically proven to reduce inflammation. So a number of more kind of physical ways to deal with inflammation. And many people have read that book and got results. And so that alone is very useful. The next one goes more into what I call the 4 pillars of vitality. So the physical, mental, emotional, energetic. And I kind of take people on a journey through how I take my own clients on a journey. So most people start with nutrition, or start with a physical pillar, for example, because it's more tangible. However, as we go through the journey, we start to understand the sheer power of our thoughts, our emotions, releasing the energy associated with trapped emotions and trauma. And the energy piece is I almost see it like a reward. It's a phenomenal way of living when we really tap into the quantum and understand the power of meditation, visualization, creating from the field, creating healing in our body through thought alone, changing the environments in our body in a meditation, and very, very short period of time. So the next book goes into each of those pillars in detail, and I always do my best to simplify things as much as possible, because I think things have been unnecessarily overcomplicated in the conventional way of doing things. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. I want to give people the tools so they can reverse engineer their symptoms.
I
And the
love that.
backbone, thank you. Yeah, and the backbone of my work is the body electric. It's understanding that we're wired up like a house with all of our organs on different circuits, and they're all passing through our teeth like circuit breakers. And it's amazing what we can do. I used to be an electrician, by the way. So when I discovered this, everything just kind of came together like one epiphany in 45 minutes.
I
So yeah, that's the next book.
I love it. So can you go into more detail about the body electric? I know that's like it's the first time I've actually ever heard of it like that.
Okay. Yeah. So like with everything, there's always a reason why we discover these different things.
Yeah.
So in 2017, I was living in LA, super healthy. I was very strict anti-inflammatory diet. I was working out every day. I was doing yoga. I had plenty of sunlight. I was going in the ocean, and I couldn't shake up a cold. And I was thinking, what is going on? Like for a month, I couldn't shake up a cold, and I was thinking, what is going on? I couldn't be healthier right now, or for as far as I could see, I couldn't be healthier. So I went to go and see a kinesiologist, a chiropractic kinesiologist, who was recommended to me by a very close friend of mine who I trust, and this guy helped my friend transform his life in 3 months. And he said, just go and check him out, see what he says. So he tested me, and within 10 minutes, he said, these 3 teeth on the side of my mouth where I hold my mobile phone have become depolarized. And I looked at him very almost with a blank face, saying, what does that mean? And he said, this is happening with a lot of people. Radiation is causing the polarity in our electrical systems to flip. So in its simplest form, our cells, we're 50 to 100 trillion cells, and they are each electrically charged, and they're meant to function with a net negative charge. And our teeth act like circuit breakers, like the fuse board in the house. So the charge in my teeth, he was very specific with the ones that he pointed to. He said, these 3, he said, most likely by your phone, have become depolarized. So imagine a battery with positive, negative one end, or positive one end, negative the other. Flip that on its head, you have a flip in polarity. Imagine that in your tooth. It drops the voltage in the circuit, and different teeth are associated with different circuits. So the 3 that he pointed to were affecting my immune system. So he used lasers on my teeth to get the polarity back to normal. I lay there as he shined these scalar energy lasers on my teeth, and I'm thinking, what is this guy doing? Anyway, my cold went away very, very quickly in 2 sessions. So I didn't touch diet, didn't touch more exercise, didn't take a bunch of supplements. It was purely electrical. And then I started to just discover whatever I'm focusing on, I just seem to attract the right information. And I watched a brilliant presentation on YouTube called Healing is Voltage, and everything just came very, very clear to me. And then I read a book called Healing is Voltage by Dr. Jerry Tennant, and I've incorporated his stuff into my book and my work. And it's just very interesting that we can reverse engineer symptoms. So as an electrician, if a light started flickering in the house, my job would be, okay, figure out what's going on in that circuit. Why is there not enough power going to that light? So we know from a body electric standpoint that a characteristic of all chronic illness is low voltage to an organ, the organ in question. So if there's not enough power going to the organ, it means it's not going to fire, it's not going to function properly. So then we go, right, why is there not enough power going to the organ? In a house, you go, oh, look, there's a rusty cable or a dodgy light switch or something, causing it to flicker. In the human body, there's normally a number of reasons why we have a drop in voltage, and it's normally toxicity, and it's insufficient cell fuels, it's trapped energy, trapped emotions, trauma, and even scarring can block the flow of energy around the body. So yeah, there's just a few really cool ways to just kind of figure out why there might be a drop in voltage for anyone. I had a client with type 1 diabetes, and we found 4 mercury fillings on the 4 teeth connected to the pancreas circuit. So type 1 diabetes is when the pancreas isn't producing insulin, or enough insulin, as I'm sure you know, but for listeners. And then those 4 teeth in question were directly connected to the pancreas circuit.
So what happened? Did he take the amalgams out?
That's a really important piece to know, by the way. If you're going to get mercury out, do it super carefully. And yes, he did. So he took the mercury out very carefully by a holistic dentist or a biological dentist. They do it meticulously because you can get mercury poisoning from not doing this correctly. And within a day, his energy changed. He was also suffering from colds, like he got ill all the time. Those have stopped. I mean, we're still in touch. This is a few years ago. He very infrequently gets ill. I don't think he's fully reversed type 1 yet, because the body's got to rebalance, and it's not like an overnight thing, but he did notice a shift in his blood sugars, and there's no reason why that organ can't start refiring in time. Talking about organs rebuilding, at Joe Dispenza last week, one of his latest testimonials is someone regrowing a thyroid that had been irradiated.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the power of epigenetics.
Yeah.
They know that any organ can rebuild, providing the environment is conducive to healing. So in my previous client's example, there's no reason why the pancreas can't rebuild. It just takes time. So it's just worth knowing what is potentially causing that interference with the electrical circuits in the body.
Got it. Now, you talked about the pillars of vitality: physical, mental, emotional, energetic. You want to just I think the physical, probably nutrition. Can you just go through each of them and just give us like an example of each?
Absolutely, yeah. So physical is nutrition, exercise, and looking into external toxins and internal toxins. So external toxins, I'll just use the example of the phone again, or if someone's sleeping next to a Wi-Fi router, or if they're sleeping next to a phone that's active all night, that's constant radiation. And, looking at the environment of the house, are they near anywhere potentially toxic? So external toxins, internal toxins could just be seeing if there are any parasites or, any intruders there that shouldn't be there. And with a bit of bioresonance testing, you can figure that out quite quickly. So that's the physical pillar. The mental pillar is really how our thoughts and beliefs can determine our physiology. They can determine our health. And we know from the placebo effect that through thought alone, you can heal the body. You can take an inert substance regularly, and with the belief that that's going to reverse your illness, you can actually reverse an illness through thought alone. It's that powerful. That's how powerful the mind is. There's not enough attention, I believe, given to the placebo effect, because we know it's scientifically proven that the body can heal through thought alone. There's also something called the nocebo effect, which is when it's the opposite of the placebo. So the placebo is working in our favor. The nocebo is when we can actually think ourselves sick. And we can become attached to the identity, for example, the label of an illness, and we can keep on recreating it and giving it energy. And the more that we give something energy, the more attention we give it, the more energy it's given, and the more that can become more of a problem. So I talk about flipping the nocebo and using the placebo as much as we possibly can. It's amazing, the power of the mind over the human body. It really is. So, and then there's also the psychology piece of committing to our health and our vitality and what it means for us, how it's going to affect each of our lives, and if we're married or have got children, and work environment, sex life, all those kind of things, kind of tying it into areas of our lives that are important to us. So it's all the psychology piece. And then there's the emotional, which is, so emotions and feelings are the language of the body. And we know that more than 90% of illness is down to chronic stress now. That's like a figure that's spoken about quite openly. So one of my tools is to help people understand what stress is, and helping my clients reframe events that would normally cause them this stress response. And I mentioned a traffic jam earlier. Two people can respond in a traffic jam very differently. One person can remain totally calm. The other person can just be swearing and weaving in and out of traffic and causing road rage. And you can see virtually the blood, rise into their head, and their blood pressure rise, and veins popping out of their neck. So that's just a response to the external environment. And we can choose how we respond in our external environment, but we haven't been taught these tools. Most people don't realize that they have power of their emotions, the power over their thoughts, because it's just not taught to us. And there's some emotional techniques that I brought in since doing Tony Robbins 10 years ago, and various other transformational programs I've done, and reading books on psychology, and kind of bringing it all together to understand the power that we have over our emotions. One of my favorite definitions of stress is it's an internal response to external strains. So why do some people react and other people don't? That goes into the next piece of the emotional, which is there's really an underlying cause of why we're reacting and why we have addictions and habits and behaviors. And it's normally, which are maybe not serving us, it's normally a result of unresolved trauma, trapped emotions and trauma.
Mhm.
So that can scare people because, oh, I don't want to go and talk about this, but we don't need to go and talk about it because there's some new ways in town to release the energy without even talking about the events.
Mm.
And we use somatic therapy and ways to get in touch with the energy associated with the events and releasing them without even talking about.
Mm.
So
Wow.
yeah, that's all tied in with the body electric because we store events. We have these like imprints, energetic imprints all over our bodies as a result of what we've experienced in our lives. And it could be what might be perceived as a small trauma, like an argument with a sibling or a parent when you're 5 years old, but it's left this imprint. And emotions are stored like electromagnetic bundles of energy. So if we can just think of emotions like that, and us as electromagnetic beings with an electromagnetic field, we can quickly understand how this energy can get trapped anywhere in the body. And there's different emotions stored and associated with different conditions. For example, grief is normally stored in the lung, and anger is in the liver. And I'm sure you've seen these charts where you've just all these different emotions where they're typically stored. So I have a process with kinesiology to help find the name of the emotion, where it's stored, when it was stored, and then we can release it very, very quickly. With magnets, believe it or not, because they're electromagnetic. So yeah, it's a really fast process, and we don't have to go and do years worth of talk therapy, which can actually give more energy to the very thing we don't want to give energy to, because of the term in neuroscience that says nerve cells that fire together wire together. So if we give something energy, it can actually become more of a problem.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. Wow, that was powerful.
Good.
Yeah, so, you talk about reverse engineering chronic illnesses. Like, how does somebody where do they even begin? Or, chronic condition or recurrent symptoms? For a lot of people out there, it seems so big. They've had it for so long. And to think of undoing it and figuring out why seems really big to them and overwhelming. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so I work through the pillars. I just realized we didn't really talk about the energetic pillar that is then, but I kind of spoke about it earlier. It's really about meditation and understanding the power that we have with this field that we're all a part of. So when we talk about reverse engineering illness, it's really, I start off, if I'm working privately with a client, it's really figuring out where they are at that point.
Mhm.
So some clients will say, I've got the diet piece dialed in, I'm anti-inflammatory, everything, we're good. And others will say, I have no idea what I'm eating. And we'll normally start with diet and just clean it up to see if that has an effect on the body, because even though food isn't the ultimate cause, it's a catalyst and it can be the quickest way to get results. We know food is medicine. It can be
Mhm.
some very powerful quotes around food. I think one of my favorites is food can either be the slowest, most, oh my goodness, slowest form of poison or the most powerful form of medicine.
Mm.
So one of the first things to do is, in terms of reverse engineering, what's one eating every single day? Is it inflammatory? I was eating a bowl of inflammation every single day for my 30 years. I was eating breakfast cereal and milk. Both of those are inflammatory for my body. So we can go, what's inflammatory for my body? Not everyone's body is, of course, the same.
Mhm.
For my body and for a vast majority of the population, gluten and dairy are inflammatory. So one of the first things I would suggest to people who have chronic symptoms is to eliminate those two things, or replace them rather, and bring sugar down and see what happens. If that makes a difference, great. Then continue doing that and replace it, find diets that work, and just really have a super clean diet and see how that has an effect on the body. Most people will find it helps. Some, not so much. So even if it does help, I think it's still worth going deeper and deeper, because food is not normally the ultimate cause. And the ultimate cause is normally unresolved trauma.
Mm.
So that's when we really go into the last piece I was just talking about. So once we've gone through a list of all the potential toxins that might be in the body, and we've taken them out. So simply put, we take the toxins out, and then we put fuel in. Toxins out, fuel in. A lot of people are malnourished. They're not even drinking water, or they're not eating nutrients. When we look at cell fuel, like, we've got to understand that we're a giant cluster of cells, and all of those cells require feeding, oxygen, water, and nutrients. They have to be able to eliminate waste. They need sleep. They need to be grounded. So there's a few very basic fundamental requirements they need. And if my clients aren't getting them, then that's where we start. But yeah, when we really start to peel back the layers of the onion is when we start to get to the ultimate cause, and it's most often trauma. Wow. Or a major toxicity that's in the body. Infected root canal, for example, you could eradicate an illness by taking out an infected root canal.
Wow. So, it sounds like it's a very stepwise approach, because I think it can sound very overwhelming to someone to say reverse engineer. They're like, oh my gosh, where do I even begin? Begin with you have, most control over, which is what you eat, right? And start small and expand on it and see what makes a difference, and then work out from there, which I love because, nowadays everyone's overwhelmed and they're so stressed, like we were just talking, so to try to get their health in line, even though they really want to, can seem adding to that, overwhelm. And so, like, you give them a very practical point of where to start with nutrition, clean that up, and then go from there.
Yeah. One thing I just want to say to that is health doesn't have to be that complicated. I understand that it can be overwhelming, and a lot of people do get overwhelmed. It's just kind of remind yourself that the body is always healing itself, and it's always striving for balance. It's striving for homeostasis all the time. It's often that we're just standing in the way of its healing. So maybe reverse engineering is a bit of a term that's a tough one to get one's head around. Think of it as this kind of, okay, where's my body toxic? What's going in my body that's not meant to be? If we're talking from a nutrition standpoint. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, this is my passion, so I love doing this. But if it's someone who's very new to it, I guess what I just think about is what is possibly standing in the way of the healing, what's causing the toxicity, and let's think of it like that.
Love that. Yeah, and I think you're like me. It's like we try to simplify the process because, let's be honest, realistically speaking, you're on social media, you're getting hit left and right with like, do this, don't do this, do this. And it's just
exactly.
It can be so, deafening. And then to the point where a lot of women I talk to, they just shut down. They stop listening and don't do any of it because there's just so much. And who do I believe? And what do I listen to? And it doesn't have to be that hard.
Totally.
It doesn't have to be hard. Right. So I think that's, and then stepping back and just taking a very simplified approach and like step by step, like don't have to do it all at once, little baby steps. Cause you didn't get there overnight. Anything that you heal naturally, it does usually take time to reverse, especially if you're going to stick with the process that got you there. So
yeah,
really important that we do it in like a little baby steps so you feel comfortable and that's sustainable.
Absolutely.
So what about someone who wants to be proactive? I mean, we're talking more reactive, which not really, like, but the disease has already occurred. What about someone who wants to be more proactive about their health? Is the process the same?
In terms of prevention, do you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, the process is the same. I mean, if we think of the body as just this giant cluster of cells, as I mentioned earlier, 50 to 100 trillion cells, depending on which cell biologist you talk to. If we want to optimize, and we want to just optimize our hormones, for example, I work with a lot of guys to increase testosterone naturally. If we want to optimize, where are we not getting sufficient cell fuel? Where is the body toxic? And, prevention, I would say one of the best things to do is for testing. Get testing, because inflammation can be there without even presenting symptoms. Most of the time it presents symptoms, but it can be there without knowing symptoms. So get some inflammatory marker tests, see what's going on. If it's elevated, okay, just say, okay, it's elevated. So there's some form of toxicity in my body. So bring that down before some kind of dis-ease occurs. a lot of people talk about how heart attacks and cancers just kind of happen out of the blue, but when you look into them, it's all a product of chronic inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
Every form of cancer is associated with chronic inflammation, with toxicity. So it's got to start somewhere. Many forms of cancer can take many years to develop until they develop into something that's detectable and measurable. So it's definitely worth knowing if there's toxicity in the body, and some tests can show us that very quickly. I didn't mention earlier as well, in terms of the dietary piece, knowing what foods to eat. So microbiome testing and some blood testing can really help determine which foods aren't or are good and which ones aren't for your body.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah. And so that person out there trying to be a little more proactive and not get ill, another thing with what I'm hearing too is like someone who already has a disease potentially taking things out, especially their nutrition, but maybe the person is more proactive. Maybe they're eating sort of clean, but maybe doing more of it. Maybe they're not getting the adequate nutrition and hydration and all of the things. Cause there's a lot of people out there thinking they're doing the right thing
Totally.
and they're on the right track, but they just have to do a little bit more of it to, downregulate those genes that are waiting to wreak havoc on their bodies. So
Absolutely.
so so we talked a lot about diet. Do you think that you can heal your body just with diet alone?
Great question. I would say the majority of the population can get results with diet, and your symptoms can go away. What I would say is, to get to the ultimate cause, we need to figure out why. Let's just say for most of your life, you could eat all these different food types and suddenly you can't. What changed?
Mm-hmm.
I met someone on the first day of Joe Dispenza about a week ago, and she developed allergies when she was 12 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and she cleared 9 of them at the last event. Like she'd had them for a decade or so. And I said to her, "Did anything big happen in your life around 12 years old?" And she looked at me kind of surprised, going, "No one's ever asked me that." And I said, "It's normally the cause of illness and symptoms." She said, "Some major stuff happened in my life when I was 12." And while she'd got to the cause through doing the energy work, the Joe Dispenza style meditations and the environment that he creates, she hadn't considered what actually triggered the allergies, because we think it's just in our genetic makeup or whatever. But it's amazing when we think, okay, there's a trigger.
Mm-hmm.
So can people heal through diet alone? I would say yes, you can definitely heal, and food is medicine. And I'd also say it's worth doing a little more digging just to see if anything started at a certain age and then work back from there.
So we're coming into the new year. You're one of the last episodes of 2022. Just give us one tip for our listeners that, anyone looking to get healthier in 2023, just one tip. What can they start doing to just move the dial towards a healthier lifestyle?
Yeah, great question. I think this starts with a vision. And if one isn't happy with their health right now, what is it that you want to bring into your life in the next year? New Year's resolutions, I find, don't tend to work, because it's like introducing sacrifice into your life and pain, and rather than a new vision. And I think there's a difference between inspiration and motivation. So I find I have a whole process actually in my program where we create a really powerful vision. So something that's so compelling, so inspiring, that it's something that pulls you forward rather than you having to kind of kick yourself into action. Some people have actually bought my program and said that was worth the investment alone, or even the private client work. So I would say get really clear on a vision, get clear on your why. Because nothing's more powerful than, well, I would suggest that it's a very, very powerful way to commit to a health transformation. I don't think resolutions work because, they're normally associated with pain, and that doesn't inspire.
Exactly. And we move away from pain, right? So,
Exactly.
and I absolutely agree, which is, I think that's a very realistic and a very doable tip for almost everybody. Like everyone else, and those that are wanting to adopt a New Year's resolution, like obviously you got to look at the outcome. What's the outcome? What's that vision of doing that New Year's resolution, just visualize that. And, every day,
is.
wake up and visualize that. And you will move towards that person that becomes that
Yeah.
just naturally and not having to overhaul your life completely.
Yeah. Visualization is so powerful.
It is.
It is so powerful.
So
And
powerful.
and what's most important is the feeling associated with it. If it's just like a thought, we need to be energized. We need to feel a shift in our vibration, a shift in our energy when we're visualizing. Because if we get excited by it, then that can pull us forward. And yeah.
And like you said, it'll pull us, but versus us trying to climb the wall, we'll get pulled up the wall just by that vision. I love it.
Yeah.
So last big question. What is one thing that you know now that you wish you knew 5, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, I love this question. I would say the one thing I wish I knew is knowing that we are more energy than we are physical. Everything changes. It's at the subatomic level, we are 99.9999999% empty space. We're energy, and 0.000001 matter particle. And I've really been diving into the quantum realm in the last few years. And as I mentioned earlier, just returned from a Joe Dispenza retreat in Cancun, and it's remarkable what people are doing. It is truly, we would consider these as miracles. People are reversing the most incurable of illnesses, blind people seeing again, handicapped people walking again, people with multiple brain tumors disappearing in the space of a week. It's all understanding the world of energy. And it's been around since the beginning of time. These teachings aren't just his. He's using principles that have been around since the beginning of our existence. He just has a brilliant way of teaching it. I say he has a brilliant way of teaching it. And he uses science and neuroscience and quantum physics and epigenetics and immunology, and he just connects it all together and makes it so tangible and relatable. And these principles have been within us this whole time. We have so much power to heal ourselves. It's extraordinary. And beyond the physical body, we can actually change our world around us by understanding our energy. And it's amazing, basically. So I wish I knew that 20 years ago. There were these 20-year-olds on stage at the end, and he just brought up all the youth saying, you're the future. You're our future. If you know this stuff, your life's going to be completely different.
Absolutely agree. I love Joe Dispenza. I'm a huge fan. I can't wait to go to one of his events in the future.
Yeah.
I have some of his preliminary work that I have to get through before I go to a live event, but very impactful, brilliant man, but really, like you said, he makes it simplified and like easy to understand. So, and it's a very abstract concept, but he brings it into your reality, like how you can apply it. It's just amazing. He's an amazing teacher. So
it really is. Yeah.
So before you go, let's tell the audience, where can they get your book from 2016, your new book coming out in February, you said it's coming out?
Yes.
And where can they connect with you? Where do you like to hang out? If you're on social media, website?
Yes. So my main website is vitalitysecret.com. That's secret singular. They can download an e-copy of the Vitality Secret, the 2016 version, at vitalitysecret.com/book. It's also available on Amazon. And on social media, I am Neil Cannon Vitality. On Instagram, I've got Neil Cannon 80 on YouTube. I'm also on Facebook, Neil Cannon 1980. I don't tend to use the pages anymore because the way the algorithms work, but they can find me there. So I'd suggest my main profile, which is Neil Cannon 80 on Facebook.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing, enlightening, all the things, and really great episode to wrap up 2022. So I so appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renee. It's been an honor and pleasure talking with you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Real Heal and that you learned something new. And before you go, can you do me a quick favor? Take a screenshot right now and share it to Instagram and tag me so I can celebrate you for taking action and improving your health. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please take a minute to leave me a rating and a quick review. This will help others just like you find the show. And do not forget to subscribe because you will not want to miss out on any of the amazing guest experts that I have coming up very soon. And remember, it's not selfish to take care of yourself. Do one thing today that makes you happy and learn to love life again. And with that, I'm out of here. Talk to you again soon.